Neurophysiology Review and its application to polysomnography. Much of this talk will be review based on what you learned in your first A&P course, but I'll also be expanding on some of these concepts that are specific to polysomnography, meaning what you need to know specifically for your curriculum in sleep. I'm recording this lecture so that you can return to it as often as you need to, because it will be items that you're tested on for your board exam after you graduate. And it'll be items that will keep coming up throughout the course of your curriculum through fundamentals, pharmacology, into your second year in the or in the sleep disorders course, all of that. So let's start with what the definition of sleep is. It is defined as a natural and periodic state of rest during which consciousness of the world is suspended. It is not unconsciousness. We are not unconscious when we are asleep. We're just have an altered or decreased consciousness because we can still wake up. We can still wake up to and respond to certain senses, to light, sound, touch. But it's we're not as responsive while we're asleep. It is physiologic, meaning it's part of our normal healthy functioning, where our consciousness is decreased, our metabolism is decreased, and our movement is decreased. Alan Rechtschaffen, is one of the grandfathers of sleep medicine. He really was kind of a huge name in the creation of sleep and also the creation of EEG. Rechtschaffen, and Kale, these two men are the first scientists that really defined what sleep is and put the definition on the different EEG waveforms to be able to better delineate what our EEG means. Stage 1 sleep, stage 2 sleep, 3 REM, all of that. And one of his quotes is if sleep does not serve an absolutely vital function, then it is the biggest mistake the evolutionary process ever made. And it's so true. Oftentimes we don't give sleep the precedence that it deserves and, throw it away like, oh, it's all right. I can sleep when I'm dead. And that's really not the thought process to have because it is so necessary to our normal and healthy functioning as human beings. So there's two regulating systems of the body, and there are two regulating systems that we're going to specifically talk about with this talk, the endocrine system and the neurologic system. The endocrine system regulates bodily functions by endocrine glands that secrete chemicals called hormones. The neurologic system is the nervous system that regulates our body functions through nerve impulses and integrating all the information that is brought to the brain and the spinal cord. We'll start by talking about the endocrine system. So the endocrine system serves many very vital functions. It regulates our growth, how we utilize food to create energy, how our body is able to withstand and handle stress, the overall acid-base balance of our internal bodily fluids, our fluid balance. It also functions to regulate reproduction, sleep, and just overall maintaining homeostasis within the body, which is the definition of homeostasis, is the state in which the internal environment of the body remains relatively stable, responding appropriately to changes in the body. So we're going to talk about how the endocrine system helps to maintain homeostasis. So endocrine glands secrete hormones directly into the capillaries that then circulate throughout the body in the blood. The hormones can exert very specific effects on target organs, or they can exert kind of a more broader effect on a lot of different organs or tissues. But the endocrine glands are ductless. That is, they do not have ducts to take their secretions to specific sites. So, say for instance, hormone A exerts very specific effects on your toe. It's not like there's a endocrine gland right in your toe excreting this hormone A directly to it. Instead, the endocrine glands excrete it into the capillaries, which then circulate the hormones in the blood throughout the body. So the hormones travel throughout the body until it reaches its target organ. Each hormone exerts very specific effects on certain organs called your target organs. But some organ hormones have many target organs. An example of that would be like insulin, which is how our body utilizes sugar to help, how our body utilizes glucose to convert it into energy and get it out of the bloodstream. So, the endocrine system operates on a negative feedback system, which means that hormones are secreted when there is a need for them. That is, for whatever their effects are on the target organ. The cells of the endocrine glands respond to changes in the blood or to other hormones in the blood, and they then use this information to increase or decrease secretion of their own hormones. When a hormone brings about its effects, the stimulus is often reversed and secretion of the hormone decreases until the stimulus reoccurs. And because of that, the negative feedback system has its own brakes. It turns itself off until the stimulus reoccurs. So, an example of this negative feedback system in real time would be insulin. Insulin is secreted by the pancreas when the blood glucose or blood sugar levels are high. So you eat something, it increases your blood sugar levels, and at that point a change is detected, and so the pancreas secretes insulin. That's the corrective actions that are activated. Once circulated in the blood, insulin then enables the cells to remove the glucose from the blood so that it can be used for energy production. As a result of this action of insulin, the blood glucose levels drop, so the conditions return to the set point, and it reverses the stimulus for the insulin secretion. So that corrective mechanism is switched off. The pancreas stops secreting insulin, and then until you eat another cookie or you take that next, you eat that next meal. Here's an example of all the different hormones that are located within the body and where they can be found, where they are secreted from. I know this isn't the most clearest picture, but I'm going to specifically go through what we need to know. You don't need to know all the different hormones specifically that can be secreted within the endocrine system, but instead what's more related to sleep. So the pituitary gland releases growth hormone, which is what promotes growth. As children, the growth hormone is what contributes to the body's growing during childhood, especially the growth of bones and muscles. The reason why it is important to sleep is because of when it is released. It is only released during non-REM, stage 3 sleep, also known as slow wave sleep. It is the deepest stage of sleep that we get in. It's the stage of sleep that if you wake up from it, you can feel very tired when you're trying to come up out of that stage of sleep because it's such a deep stage of sleep. So you have that kind of inertia from it where it's very hard to wake up. So if you ever take a nap and you've slept for a little bit too long and you try waking up and you feel so much worse than how you felt when you laid down, it's because you let yourself sleep too long and you allowed your body to get into that slow wave sleep or stage 3 sleep. We still get it as adults. We still get into stage 3 sleep, not as much as when you're younger. As adults, obviously, we're no longer growing, but instead, stage 3 is used and we have growth hormone released for tissue repair and replacement. So we do still get into stage 3 sleep, just not as much. Children get a lot more stage 3 sleep because they need it in order to grow. As adults, we're done growing, but we do still need stage 3 sleep for that tissue repair and replacement. We do still need that growth hormone for all of that. What you'll find is that as you continue to age, as a person gets older and older, the amount of slow wave sleep and thereby the amount of growth hormone progressively decreases to the point that once a person reaches old age, they don't really get into stage 3 sleep at all anymore, which means they aren't getting that growth hormone anymore for that tissue repair or replacement. So, growth hormone is regulated by releasing hormones by the hypothalamus because the pituitary gland is located in the hypothalamus of the brain. And by releasing hormones, what that means is it's kind of like a redundant thing that growth hormone is released when growth hormone releasing hormone is detected in the blood. So growth hormone releasing hormone is what then prompts growth hormone to be released when a person enters stage 3 sleep. The pineal gland, also known as the pineal body, is part of the epithalamus, and it's what produces melatonin. Melatonin is a hormone that stimulates the onset of sleep and it increases its duration. So, how melatonin works in the body and affects sleep is that as the light of it starts to dissipate, as it starts to become dark outside in the evening time, our body recognizes this lack of light and then starts making and secreting melatonin when it starts to get dark out. And that's how our body signals the length of the day and the beginning of night to start getting ready for sleep. When light enters our eyes and travels via that retinohypothalamic tract to the pineal gland, it actually blocks the release of melatonin. So the summer, when the days are a lot longer and we get a lot more sunlight into the evening hours, that's probably why you find it could be a little bit more difficult to fall asleep when you have that light entering into your eyes that much later, because melatonin is only released once darkness occurs. The other problem that we see in our modern day and age is that the electronics emit the same type of light that enters through the eyes. It's on the same spectrum, the same blue light kind of spectrum that can occur from sun, and it can have a very similar effect as to if we're out in the sunlight, where it's blocking the release of melatonin. And so that's one of the reasons why in a lot of the articles that you'll read about, trying to practice and promote good sleep habits to eliminate the electronics in the early evening hours. And that way it doesn't interfere with the natural process of melatonin being produced and secreted in the evening hours as the daytime starts to dissipate. So we normally sleep during the rising phase of melatonin secretion, which means, as the daylight hours start to go down, you see this kind of spike in the secretion in our blood levels of melatonin. It levels off or plateaus at some point in the middle of the night and then starts to take a sharp decline. And it's during that point that we wake up. Being a night shifter, if you work off hours, meaning that you're working an overnight and trying to sleep during the day, our body and our internal body clock is still set up like this, where our melatonin is secreted at night, plateaus, all of that. And so what's happening for somebody that works night shift, they're trying to fall asleep during the declining phase, during this falling phase of melatonin. And so it's one of the physiologic reasons why trying to work night shift, your sleep is not of the same quality as if you're sleeping during the night when it's natural and normal for your body to do so. So it's one of the things that, I'll talk about in terms of if you do work night shift after graduation, or even being on night shift when you're doing your clinical year, to really have to make sleep a priority and to give yourself plenty of time to sleep when you're doing the night shift, and to be able to recover and be kind to yourself when you're doing the night shift, because the sleep that you are getting, it's just not equivalent to the quality of sleep that you would be getting when it's physiologically, when your body is physiologically designed to sleep. The other thing I'll talk about is that melatonin levels do tend to drop as we age. And melatonin is also known as an oncostatic hormone because it has been known to inhibit tumor growth. So that's an idea of future kind of research of using melatonin in that regard. But melatonin can be taken as a supplement. I'm sure you've probably seen it in the drugstore. The problem with the drugstore version of what you're seeing is that it's an over-the-counter product, and it's considered a supplement, which means it's not regulated by the FDA. So there's really no guarantee to its efficacy, to its potency, to its strength, all of that. But it has been known to help people sleep better, especially if people have a sleep schedule disturbance. Circadian rhythm is our internal body clock, and it really is what sets our sleep and wake times. And so somebody that has a disrupted circadian rhythm is someone that is sleeping when it's not natural and normal for them to do so, or their body clock just isn't lining up with what they need to do. Meaning you might have somebody that has a delayed circadian rhythm, which is another term for a night owl. They go to sleep a lot later and wake up a lot later than what is conventional. So it can present a problem for a person like this if they do have to wake up early for school, for work, for anything like that. So taking melatonin can help with that, to help get their sleep schedule on to where they kind of need it to be. But again, it's a supplement, so there's no recommended dose. People can have different responses to it, and it can cause side effects. Some people complain of headache, irritability. It can give vivid dreams and cause that morning grogginess, kind of that hangover effect, so to speak. So now we're going to talk about the nervous system, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system is your brain and spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system consists of the cranial nerves, spinal nerves, and the autonomic nervous system. So the brain is comprised of the cerebrum, the cerebellum, the brainstem, which houses the pons, midbrain, and medulla. And then we have the diencephalons, which is a small area of the brain that houses the hypothalamus, thalamus, epithalamus, and the pineal gland. Ooh, sorry about that. So the meninges. The meninges are three membranes that envelop the brain and the spinal cord. They protect the brain and spinal cord and help provide blood supply to the skull. They also provide a space for the flow of cerebral spinal fluid. There are three layers. You have the dura mater, which is the outer toughest layer of the meninges, the arachnoid mater, which is the web-like middle layer, and that's why it's called arachnoid, because it's web-like, think spider, and the pia mater, which is the innermost layer of the meninges. The brain stem connects the spinal cord to the remainder of the brain. It's an incredibly important area of the brain, which means that damage to the brainstem usually is fatal. The three components of the brainstem are the pons, midbrain, and medulla. And once we talk about what each of these areas of the brainstem control, you'll understand why damage to the brainstem is usually fatal. The medulla regulates the rate and force of our heartbeat. It regulates the diameter of the blood vessels, thereby regulating our blood pressure. It houses a respiratory center that helps regulate the breathing, and it has reflex centers for coughing, sneezing, swallowing, and vomiting. So, our heart rate, our blood pressure, and our breathing are three very vital functions, which is one of the reasons why we cannot survive without the medulla. The pons also contains two respiratory centers that work with the medulla to create that normal breathing rhythm. You've probably already heard of the apneustic and pneumotaxic center. The apneustic center is what prolongs inhalation until it receives impulses from the pneumotaxic center, which then contributes to exhalation. So the two breathing centers in our brain are housed in the pons and the medulla. The pons is also important for REM sleep. REM standing for rapid eye movement. It is the stage of sleep where we do the majority of our vivid dreaming. So the pons is the area of the brain that signals the start of REM sleep. And when the pons starts those signals then travel to the thalamus that then relays it to the rest of the cerebral cortex. The pons also acts as a mediator, relaying info from the cerebrum to the cerebellum, so from the big brain to the little brain. The pons send signals that shut off neurons in the spinal cord, causing temporary paralysis of the limb muscles. The reason why this happens during REM sleep, we have, let me backtrack. During REM sleep, we have what's known as muscle atonia or muscle paralysis. All of our muscles are completely shut off except for our eyes, because they move all around inside your head. That's why rapid eye movement or REM sleep is called REM sleep, because your eyes truly are moving quite rapidly during this stage of sleep. And then, of course, your diaphragm. Your diaphragm isn't paralyzed so that you can continue to breathe and not die during REM sleep. What happens though, so the pons is what initiates this muscle paralysis that happens during REM sleep. If something interferes with this paralysis, you would have what's known as REM behavior disorder. Or REM behavior disorder is a disorder where a person acts out their dreams. This is dangerous because these people, this patient population, will often injure themselves or their bed partner in the process of acting out their dreams. They're doing whatever they're dreaming about, punching, kicking, walking, and so they can fall out of bed. I've had a patient break his foot by putting his foot through a hard surface. A lot of times the patients come into the lab for evaluation because of an injury, not because, oh, this is weird, I'm doing all these crazy things while I'm sleeping. No, it's because they've injured themselves or they've injured their bed partner. Plenty of them have punched their spouse a few times before, the spouse kicks them out of bed until they get evaluated. So that's what happens if the pons fails to cause this temporary paralysis, is you would act out your dreams. So that muscle atonia that occurs during REM is a protective mechanism. And it's one of the components of why the pons really does control a lot of the different aspects of REM sleep. When we talk about the different stages of sleep, you'll notice that stages 1, 2, 3 are specifically named non-REM stage 1, non-REM stage 2, non-REM stage 3, and then we have REM. And the reason behind that is because the sleep people, the scholars that enacted this change, is they wanted to further really concrete the difference between non-REM and REM sleep. They're two very distinct different types of sleep. And the areas of the brain that control these stages, the non-REM versus REM, are different as well. And so it's really important to commit to your memory that the pons is what is important for initiating and controlling a lot of the components of, and it's really important for REM sleep. The midbrain is the smallest region of the brain stem. It has a lot of different reflexes for sight, for hearing. It also has writing reflexes that help keep your head upright and help to maintain balance or equilibrium. Not as important for sleep, but it's important to know what it does. The reticular formation is a group of nuclei scattered throughout the brainstem, and it plays a very important role in in arousing and maintaining consciousness, and waking us up and maintaining consciousness. So the reticular formation is the nuclei actually located within the brain stem, because you've probably heard of the reticular activating system. So the reticular activating system is the nuclei of the reticular formation, and then all of its connections that these nuclei make to the rest of the brain constitute the reticular activating system. It's heavily involved in the sleep wake cycle. It's what receives most input from our body's sensory systems. So our sight, touch, all of that, to then project to the rest of the brain to influence the body's overall degree of wakefulness and arousalness. The reticular activating system will increase alertness and attention when it's receiving a lot of visual and acoustic stimuli. So when it's receiving, maybe bright lights, loud sounds, things like that, or if you're engaging in mental activities. Stimuli like bright lights, alarm clock, cold water splashed on your face, it can all arouse consciousness. Drowsiness or sleep occurs when the reticular activating system stops, dissipates its projections to the rest of the brain. So the removal of the visual or auditory stimuli. So, you're in a dark room or a dark lecture hall, and you're not hearing a lot of things, or my voice gets very quiet, very monotone, and I tell you, you don't need to know these things. So, this is just a fun lecture. And so I'm removing that motivation to stay awake. And so sleepiness or drowsiness is a lot easier to attain by. But I'm telling you, you need to know these things. So stay awake for this one. So here's another picture of the reticular activating system. It's really a pictorial view of how it works, how it's the reticular formation, which is the group of nuclei scattered throughout the brainstem, and then all of its connections that it has throughout the rest of the brain to determine the overall level of alertness. And that's what really creates this whole entire system, the reticular activating system. The diencephalon is a small area located between the brainstem and your big brain, your cerebrum. Its main components are the thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus. The thalamus is the largest portion of the diencephalon. It's where most sensory input first comes into the thalamus first. And how I like to think of it is, if you think of one of these like old school operators that when back before anybody's time here, when you used to make a phone call, you didn't dial the house directly, you would dial a main operating system who would then connect you to wherever your phone call was to go. And so think of that, I always picture that in my mind when I think of the thalamus. All of our sensory input is coming into the thalamus, which is this lovely lady right here. And then it's the thalamus that then determines where those impulses are going to go on the cerebrum for those sensations to be felt. Like, okay, I'm receiving input from the fingers. Let me connect this signal to the area of the cerebrum where sensations on the fingers are felt. So it's the thalamus that does all that. And so because of that, it's very important in influencing our overall degree of wakefulness. It influences our mood and our body movements, especially those associated with strong emotions like fear or rage. The thalamus is important in suppressing unimportant sensations so that your brain can really concentrate on the important tasks. at any given second, our brain is receiving so many different impulses from all the different sensory neurons within our body. Think of, the sensory neurons on your skin that are touching your clothes, from where you're sitting, all the different sounds that you could be hearing. But it's allowing your brain to suppress all those unimportant sensations for you to really concentrate on the important task in front of you. You're able to suppress the noise from the heating system or from whatever else might be happening in your house. You're able to suppress the feeling, the sensations from your skin, from, your clothes or from your chair, or from whatever, in order to be able to focus on the important task, listening to this lecture. Because of that, it really does play a major role in our awareness and alertness. The last part of, not the last part, the next part of the diencephalon is the epithalamus, which consists of the habenular nuclei and the pineal body. The habenular nuclei is what is influenced by our sense of smell, and it is involved in a lot of the emotional and instinctive responses that we have to scent. I don't know if you've ever heard this, but scent or smell is very closely related to our memory. You smell something and it kind of triggers that memory or that emotion, and you can thank your habenular nuclei for that. The pineal body, also known as the pineal gland, we've already spoken about because it's important when we talk about the endocrine system. It's involved in the sleep-wake cycle by responding to the light-induced signals by switching off the production of the hormone melatonin. The hypothalamus contains a group of neurons that produce neurotransmitters associated with wakefulness. Neurotransmitters that are produced by the hypothalamus then are projected and travel to the areas of the brain that are associated with arousal. Narcolepsy is a disorder where the lines between sleep and wake are very blurred. Think of a dog. A dog is able to fall asleep very quickly, but they also can wake up very quickly. Their sleep-wake lines are blurred, are more blurred than humans. They're not too, not that they're not very distinct states, but in humans, most normal humans, sleep and wake are two very distinct and separate states. Narcolepsy, there is this kind of blurriness between sleep and wake. And so it's associated, the kind of physiological thought behind what's happening in this patient population is that there is this degeneration of the hypothalamic neurons that are associated with wakefulness and their projections to the rest of the brain. And so that's why, their sleep-wake distinction is not nearly as concrete as it would be in somebody that has these very intact hypothalamic neurons and projections. The hypothalamus is important for regulating your body temperature by promoting responses like shivering or sweating. And one thing that is a strong takeaway from this talk is that anything related to temperature, to our internal body temperature, is very strongly related to sleep. And a lot of that comes down to our internal body clock. Our circadian rhythm. It shows that what they've found through studies is that sleep and our thermal regulation are very strongly tied together. Our internal body temperature changes throughout the day, increases, decreases, and what they've found is the increases, decreases are very heavily correlated to how you're feeling in terms of your alertness levels. And so again, with the whole melatonin and that melatonin cycle, same thing with our internal body clock, or internal body temperature, that our internal body temperature takes these swings and dips, and our alertness levels are very strongly correlated to that. So like when you're feeling that afternoon dip in the afternoon, that kind of sluggishness that you can feel right after lunch, where you're tired, you don't feel as alert as with it, that's physiologic. It's because your body temperature is taking a little bit of a dip When you feel most awake and alert is when your body temperature is at their peaks or on the rising phase. And this is another reason why trying to sleep during the day, if you're working a night shift or something like that, this is another reason or a piece of why physiologically it's difficult to get a good quality sleep, because this is another component of your body system where you're sleeping when it's not natural and normal for your body to sleep. You're sleeping on the opposite phase of your body temperature swings. So anything related to or anything having to do within the brain that controls our internal body temperature is automatically synced and related to how in our controls of sleep. The other component of the hypothalamus is it's important in controlling the endocrine system. It regulates the pituitary gland secretion of hormones, which we've already known. The pituitary gland is important for the release of melatonin, and it releases a bunch of the other neurotransmitters and hormones that really play an important role in the regulation of sleep and wakefulness. An important part of the brain housed within the hypothalamus is the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or the SCN. The SCN is our internal pacemaker. It's our circadian rhythm generator within the brain. It is what maintains this 24-hour rhythmicity of our bodily functions and our bodily cells and all of that. It maintains this rhythmicity. It's what sets our cycle, our sleep-wake cycles, but also everything else that is cycling throughout the day, throughout a 24-hour period. Our temperature swings, our melatonin release, and all of that, and our neurotransmitter and hormone releases and secretions that impact sleep and wakefulness. They're all in terms of the rhythmicity of the release and secretion and changes and all of that and all these bodily processes. They're all controlled by the suprachiasmatic nucleus.